Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Playtime. And have a little game. This is part and parcel of me worrying about how fast my moss is breaking down and what level of acidity it generates as a consequence. So I picked this Masdevallia. I watered this deliberately yesterday, so it's wet. Yeah. Which means that the media can't absorb too much water. So what water it's going to get now will be extra. The idea being that the moisture in the pot comes out into the water rather than it going the other way round. If it was dry and I watered it, all the water would soak into the media and I wouldn't get the result I want. What I'm after is to try and find out how acidic that media is. So the idea is, this is RO water, so I'm going to put the pot in that mug because it fits in there quite nicely. I've put a tray there because it's going to overflow, and then what I'm going to do is water it again until it comes out over the top of the mug. I'm just going to pour water in it. I've just noticed this has got a bud on it as well. Oh, the marvels. It hasn't bloomed for some time, but it is now. So what I'm doing is I'm pouring water through and filling the mug up, and eventually the mug will overflow. And I put the tray there in the newspaper because I don't want to clear up the mess. There we are, it's just got up to the top now, so it's just started to overflow. Yeah, so the pot is now floating in there. That is not a large volume of water. This pot fits quite snugly in there. If you must get that out of the way. If you have a look at the shape of the pot and the shape of the mug, that fits quite tightly in there. Yeah? Which is the idea. And now what I'm going to do is just leave that like that, probably for a couple of hours. What's the time now? 2:30. Well, I don't want it getting in the way of tea time. I've obviously got to get my evening meal out here. So sometime later in the afternoon I'll come back and we'll check the pH and the TDS of the water in the mug. And the only stuff that can be in that water has to have come out of the pot. Yeah? Which gives us an impression, it's not exact science, of what was in the pot, if you see what I mean, because the pot was wet. So this additional water is drawing stuff out of the media, as opposed to when it's dry it sucks it in. That was the idea. Right, so we'll be back later, and I've got my TDS meter and my pH meter. I started doing this yesterday and I thought I haven't actually calibrated that pH meter for ages. Well, as I want this quite close to, let's calibrate the pH meter. I got the camera out and everything because I was doing this, and I thought we'll just calibrate the pH meter to start with. And I thought, well, if I'm going to calibrate it, I'll put new batteries in, because obviously when you take the batteries out, you disconnect the power, so you have to recalibrate it again. So I took the batteries out, and one of the little terminals snapped off the wire. So I've now got a broken pH meter. There was a lot of language, certainly not suitable for ladies or gentlemen, and basically I stormed into the other room, logged onto eBay and bought a cheapo one, just a cheapo one, so that I've got something somewhere near it. Doesn't have to be exact, does it? It's only Orchids, for goodness sake, not a science lab. Anyway, then I calmed down a bit, as one does, and I thought, I've got a soldering iron. I wonder if I could solder that little terminal back on. So anyway, I got the soldering iron out, and with great delicacy and one burnt finger, we managed to actually solder the little terminal back onto the end of the wire and put it back where it should go. And got a new set of batteries in, and I'd had enough by then, so I left it at that. So what I've done is I've just calibrated that now. And I must admit, it was giving quite an erratic reading. And I had a quick look at the instructions, and one of the things it does say is every now and again you should clean the little bulb, the little glass bulb, because it can get dirty despite rinsing it after I use it religiously every single time. And I had a look at it with a torch, like a strong light. And it was quite grubby, it was quite brown and discoloured. So I gave it a scrub with a soft toothbrush to get all the muck off. And it started reading a steady reading, or reasonably steady, far steadier than it ever has done anyway, for some considerable time. You know, I'd put that in some water and I'd get, you know, like whatever, 6.5 to 6.6 to 6.65, and it would just wander about all over the place for some considerable time. And then it would settle down and you give it a shake in the water and it would fly all over the place again. So it was not giving a good reading, but I think it will now that I've cleaned it a bit. And I'll have to remember to do that a bit more often, won't I? Anyway, we will leave that for a bit and come back and read what we've got in the mug. And I'm expecting the pH to have dropped. pH of my RO water is around 7. It might be a little less. It could even be a little more, because obviously it starts out as tap water, but the tap water varies. It varies in the amount of stuff in it, salts and things, and it can vary in pH as well. But the tap water's pH is normally higher than 7, heading towards 8. That's 7.7, 7.8. Yeah, and after it's been through the RO meter, it comes out at 7 or thereabouts. However, stored RO water, if exposed to the air, he says, quickly putting the lid on, can actually absorb elements from the air, which will give it a lower reading, a lower pH. I think it's the carbon dioxide or something it sucks in from the air. But it takes in something from the air which lowers the pH a bit, but we're only talking about 0.1 or something like that. So instead of being 7, it could be like 6.9, possibly even 6.8, but thereabouts, not enough to worry about. I'm expecting the pH of that water to be low, possibly less than 6, and I'm expecting the TDS to have gone up a bit. I won't say too much, because when I watered it yesterday it was just a flush, and I think the time it was watered before was probably a flush as well. But you get a TDS reading from old media. You know, it's the breaking down process actually dissolves some of the media into something that's measurable as a TDS reading. So we'll be back later and have a look and see what we've got. Okay. Let's see what we've got. Obviously the pot is now absolutely soaking wet. Oh, the first thing we've got is very brown water. I'm going to get that out of there so that I can stand that in there and not drip all over the place. So that's that out of the way now, that's dealt with. And this is the water that's come out. So we have colour for a start. So colour is leaching out, which means something, to me that just means something's not right. That was clean pure water went in there, and after it's just on an hour, so this has only had 1 hour soaking. So first job, what does TDS meter say? TDS meter says 43. So in an hour, that amount of something has come out of that. Now I'm just going to stop the camera again and check on my notes to see whether the last time, because when I watered this yesterday, that was clean water. I want to see what it had before, whether it had some feed in it or a flush. I'll be back. Right, okay, a little bit more complicated than normal. Last time I watered the cooler, shadier ones, which this would have been in that set, this one was still wet, so it got missed out. The time before that, when it got watered, it did get watered in that run, and that was a flush. So this has in effect had 2 flushes consecutively with a long gap in between, about 2 weeks in fact, which just goes to show the media must be old because it's holding water far too long. Right, so we do have something in there which we could do without. And now we'll go for the important bit. What's the TDS meter say? I'll jiggle that around a bit and then let it sit and steady down, which it should do reasonably quickly. 5.7. Nearer 5.8, I would say. That's in an hour, right? So that is a mix of Orchiata small bark and my zombie moss, the dried sphagnum moss, and one or both of those are badly broken down. If in an hour I can drop the pH, so imagine what's in the pot on a regular basis then, yeah? Because obviously I water it, it's very, very wet. It's still wet in a week's time. What the hell is the pH in that pot after that amount of time? Because it's still holding its moisture, because it's old media. Right, so that proves the point as far as I'm concerned. A ridiculously low pH in an hour. So what would that pH have been if I'd left it overnight? It stood in that water, I wonder. And we actually had a TDS reading as well. So we actually had some substance in there, possibly undissolved salts. Could have been one of many things. I'll remember to rinse that. Remember to rinse both of them, but I'll do that in a minute. Right, now in preparation for dealing with this, that is now going to get repotted as far as I'm concerned as an emergency, and I will now go through all of my pots tomorrow and my notes in combination and actually find out. What I'm hoping to do is lift this out of the pot and put it in the black pot to start it drying off. Let's get rid of that water first. So the idea is to now start this drying off because it's very, very wet. Oh, that came out nicely. But there are some good roots on there, surprisingly. And I'm just standing it in there so that it can start drying off, if you see what I mean. And then we'll put that in there so it doesn't drip water all over the place. That's ready for tomorrow now. And it will have some friends, I'm sure, because I will now go through early tomorrow. So that I've got time to deal with it at the end of the day. What is tomorrow? Saturday, isn't it? Yeah, a repotting session then, I think, maybe in order. And it just goes to show sometimes you let things go. Now that has been in that pot a long time. I lost my records, but it's down there as late 2018 question mark. So it's possibly been in that pot 2 years. That's obviously far too long with that media. Yeah, should have been done a long time ago. We will deal with it. We haven't lost the plant and we've still got some good active roots in there. So I would suspect that the plant is starting to go downhill because some roots are starting to die. And the chances are new growths are probably not as good as they should be and not as many. Yeah, so it would be now deteriorating, and quite honestly it hasn't put on a lot of growth. So we'll deal with it, and we'll deal with any others we find that are in a similar position. We'll go from there. That was a nice little learning curve, quite honestly. If you don't do these things you never find out, you know, you just go along sort of blindly in the dark thinking everything ought to be okay when it possibly isn't. That pot is a long way off. Yeah, a TDS and a pH reading of that after an hour's soak is well out of order, and there are going to be other pots in a similar position. Now I don't know whether it's the moss. Well, it will be the moss definitely, but it might be the small Orchiata bark as well. Because it's small, it does stay wet, and combined with the moss it stays very wet. Yeah, there's virtually no wet dry cycle involved in a Masdevallia, and the combination of those two, it's gone off basically. So we will deal with it, and that will probably be tomorrow's video, is at least sorting out the ones that need to be looked into, and getting them separated out, and I'll put them somewhere that's in the way so that they have to get dealt with. Whether they all get dealt with tomorrow or not, I don't know. It depends how many we find. But they're probably all going to go in a similar mix. And in actual fact, taking a load of plants out of their pots, getting the old media off and repotting them is not actually a long-winded job. It is if you've tried filming it and talking about it all the time. It's like this should have been a short video, it's now a longer one. Anyway, problem identified, solution easy. So we'll get on with that as soon as possible. See you next time. Bye for now.